Hi, I'm Sana and this is a quick overview of A-Level Media Studies at HNC. So one of the key texts that we look at is representation, and that is how things look in the media, how people are represented, how places are represented, and the different ways that we might interpret those as audiences. So there's a range of different things in terms of what or who can be represented. So we've got things like gender, race or ethnicity, religion, age, disabilities, social classes, politics, locations, sexuality. The list is endless, it goes on. And we may not necessarily understand these or immediately see them when we engage with everyday media, but in this particular course and in this particular text, we do look at the specific ways in how they're represented and why they might be represented in those particular ways. And like I said, it may not be completely obvious. So for example, if we look at this initial advertisement of Britney Spears, she looks quite elegant, she looks quite sophisticated, she looks very pretty, she meets beauty standards in terms of she is blonde, she is looking directly at the camera, she has makeup on, she's got a nice sparkly dress on, advertising a nice pink perfume. We kind of want to buy the perfume, maybe it looks like it smells good, and she's a nice influential person to buy the perfume. However, if we then look at this Daily Mirror front cover, we can see that Britney obviously looks significantly different to the perfume advertisement. She looks a bit more distressed, she looks quite angry. We've got words that are anchoring this image like rage, threatens, custody battle, and she looks significantly worse, shall we say, than the actual perfume advertisement. The reason that she's been represented in these two ways, in these two particular key texts, is to give off a specific message. So in the perfume advertisement, we want her to look attractive. We want her to look like somebody that we might aspire to be, somebody that women stereotypically might aspire to look like. And so we might buy this perfume because we want to look the way Britney is represented here. However, the newspaper's aim is to sell newspapers, and so they're going to want to post something that is a lot more urgent, a lot more shocking, a bit more of a shock factor. The aim of the newspaper is to sell as many copies as possible, and so representing Britney Spears in a much more horrific way is going to sell more newspapers than representing her in a lot more positive way, because unfortunately negative news attracts a lot more viewers. Whereas the advert is going to represent her in a nicer way, because the idea is to sell the perfume, to make money. These two representations carry different meanings, and it's those meanings that we look into in media studies, get a bit more of a deeper insight into why Britney might be represented in this way and why she may be represented in this way, and how that affects our minds as audiences and what we believe. For example, if you look at the way that women were represented in the 1950s, we can see that they were a lot more modest in terms of their fashion. We had a lot more mid-length skirts. They were very domesticated or stereotypically represented as housewives, stereotypically represented as submissive to men, very much traditional gender roles in terms of what we expect of women. Traditionally, stereotypically, women have always been seen in much more narrow roles of housewives, a lot more less educated, and have permanent roles within the house, etc. Whereas the men were the homeowners, they were the breadwinners. They went out and they made money and they came home and provided for their wife and kids. This was the 1950s in terms of what we traditionally believe of women in those particular roles. Whereas women today are represented in a lot more varied ways. So we have women that are deemed a lot more independent, women that may be sexualized a little bit more, women that have their own freedom, their own success through their own cultural iconic presence in the actual media industry. And so the differences between the way women were represented in the 1950s, modest, traditional, stuck in the housewife role, to the way that women are represented today is a class representation of gender and how that's progressed from the 1950s all the way up until the 2020s. And it's this particular change in women, in the representation of gender, in the representation of age and social class that we look at throughout media studies, as well as the representation of different things like age, disabilities, and sexuality. This shift in the media from women in the 1950s to women today has happened because the audiences are changing, because students like yourselves come to HNC to study things like this so that you can understand why TikToks are being made in that way, why Facebook now owns Instagram, why Kylie Jenner's Instagram might look the way it does. All of these things are things that you engage with as young people, but may not necessarily understand the actual depth or the actual meaning behind it. And I think it's super duper important that this course teaches young people how to understand the media that we are consistently being bombarded with all the way through. If you look at things like this Harry Styles Vogue edition in which he's wearing a dress, Harry Styles is another very iconic singer / actor who has crossed the boundaries in terms of gender expression and gender representation. In this Vogue front cover, he's wearing a dress, very stereotypically a feminine garment, but obviously Harry Styles, as a person who has an iconic position in the media industry, he's able to come out and influence the gender expression within the music industry, that you don't have to be as structured or as stringent as the stereotypical gender roles that we are used to. You also look at things like newspapers, because they are a dying readership, unfortunately. Young people aren't reading newspapers, but media is still important to get to know and understand why newspapers are so important for influencing people. The different kinds of headlines that perpetuate different ideologies for people in England, and maybe understand why there is such a divide between social classes in the UK. Also look at things like magazines, because your coursework at the beginning of year 13 also involves making your own magazine, which allows you to have a little bit more of a creative take on the actual curriculum itself. We look at different types of magazines, what kind of genre you might do. A lot of people do tend to do health because young people do go to the gym a lot. We look at Beyonce specifically, as she is somebody that is on the curriculum, and how she has become a very successful icon, and why she is an influential person to spread political messages around America, etc. Social realism films like Kidulthood, to understand that the world isn't just glossy and high budget like Black Panther or Marvel, that there are actually realistic situations in working class societies that we do need to engage with as well. Representation of race and ethnicity through a bunch of different media texts, and we don't actually look at this as England, but I do use it as a nice key text. So different representations of different genders, different races, different classes, etc., to really help young people understand and engage with media, and why it is so important to understand it, because we are consistently bombarded with it 24/7. We also look at this idea of presence and absence, and that ties into representation, and all it essentially talks about is who is there and who isn't there. But that also raises questions as to why those chosen people are there. Why are there more men in Hollywood films as lead action roles? Why are they the ones that consistently take those saviour roles in American films? Is it to consistently reinforce traditional roles that men are winners and that women are submissive, or is it just a coincidence? It can't be a coincidence if it happens repeatedly again and again and again. If you look at these 4 images here, we've got Pain and Gain, White House Down, Spectre and Thor. 4 huge movies, high budget, Hollywood films that all have male roles in them. Yes, there are women, but the women are specifically more submissive, more passive roles to men. And it's this consistent reinforcement of men as the dominators, as men as the breadwinners, men as the main characters, men as the heroes, that sort of pattern and translate into everyday society. So now we are engaging with men as if they are dominators or if they are heroes. And if we see a man that is in a submissive role, it's not something we're used to, and it might be deemed a little bit weird or a little bit unique. So the media actually influences the way that we engage with different people, the way that we engage with real life, and the way that we engage with the real world. And that's super important when studying it at HNC, because it will not only help you with your 2 exams, with your coursework, with your understanding of a media education in your further career, but also how you might interact with people in your everyday life, how you might look at a Hollywood film and recognise, why is it always America that's the super country, and why is it always men that are the heroes? It doesn't reflect real life as authentically as it should. And being a student at HNC and studying A-level media studies will help you understand the media that you are consumed with every single day on a more nuanced level. If we look at the top grossing movies from the past 20 years, we can see very evidently that movies that have contained, representation-wise, white male men as the main characters are the ones that tended to do the most successfully. So if you look in 2002, the #1 film in terms of box office was Spider-Man, the second one was Star Wars, and the third one was Harry Potter. Yes, they do contain women. Yes, there are not just men in those particular films, but the protagonists, the heroes of all three of those top 3 films are white men. Maybe a coincidence. Let's look at the top grossing movies of 2012. #1, we have The Avengers. #2, we have The Dark Knight Rises. But #3, we have The Hunger Games, which is a female-led film. So we are progressing a little bit in terms of maybe gender representation of success. If you then look at the top grossing movies of 2022, we'll see that the first one was Top Gun Maverick, the second one was Black Panther, and the third one was Doctor Strange. And so this is showing the shift in progression in terms of dominant races, dominant genders in society, and the representation thereof. If you look back at 2002 and you look at maybe the first 10 films, there is one that has a black man as a protagonist, and that is Men in Black. The rest of them are all predominantly American films, predominantly white male casts. If you continue on, that list slowly changes and progresses so that there is a much more inclusive, much more diverse representation of races, of genders, and of different representations throughout the top grossing films. So this again is another representation of how progressive society needs to be, how progressive society is. And studying A-level media studies at HNC helps you to understand why that progression is necessary, why that progression is there, and how the different changing representations in your life, things that you experience, are important to understand and important to know, essentially. If we look at this advertisement for Natalie Portman for Miss Dior, the caption is, "And you, what would you do for love?" Again, we can see that she is very sexualized. She's looking at the camera. She looks as though she doesn't really have many clothes on. The typography of Miss Dior up here looks very feminine. It's italic. It looks very traditionally what we would associate with femininity, what you would associate with women. We also have a reinforcement of femininity with the bottle, the fact that it's got a little bow on it, it's pink, very much a feminine perfume that we know is aimed at women. But how would you know it's aimed at women other than the key things that we associate with women or with femininity? Pink, italics, and a naked lady. Yeah, directly not named for men, but again a reinforcement that maybe women need to be more sexualized, maybe women need to be more passive, women need to be a little bit more vulnerable, they need to be a little bit more fragile. And when you have a successful celebrity like Natalie Portman showcasing star power, selling a perfume like this, you're also selling this traditional feminine ideology that women should be like this, that to be feminine, to be successful, this is what you should be wearing as a perfume, and this is kind of the characteristics that you should be exhibiting. And so A-level media studies shows you that there are different ways that you can represent femininity. There's different ways that we progress in terms of the representations over time, and it's super important to understand and know because it helps you interact with your everyday life. So thank you very much for engaging with this video for A-level media studies at HNC. We hope you enjoy the course, and hopefully we'll see you soon in this classroom.